sworn to the hunt. Amara Vale had always been told that the trees could speak, that if she listened carefully, she would hear them calling her name. She had laughed at the tales until the night she did. The wind carried whispers. The branches trembled, though there was no breeze. And then she saw him, standing among the trees, tall and still, his silver eyes fixed on her with an almost reverent hunger. "You have heard them," he murmured, stepping closer. "That means they have chosen you." Chapter 1. Whispers in the Twilight. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a familiar comfort to Amara Vale. At 58, the forest behind her ancestral home, Vale House, was less a mystery and more an old friend, its paths worn smooth by generations of her family's footsteps. Yet tonight it felt different, unsettled. The familiar twilight hush was punctuated by a subtle, almost imperceptible hum, a vibration that resonated deep within her bones. Amara paused on the overgrown path, her hand resting on the rough bark of an ancient oak. She'd come seeking solace, as she often did, after a particularly trying day at the small-town library where she worked. The quiet murmur of turning pages, the scent of aging paper, those were her havens. But today, even those familiar comforts had failed to soothe the persistent ache in her heart, a lingering echo of the life she'd almost had, a life snatched away 20 years ago when her fiancé, Thomas, had died in a car accident. The wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves around her ankles. But it wasn't a natural gust. It felt directed, as if the trees themselves were exhaling, their breath carrying a whisper that danced on the edge of her hearing. Amara, she shook her head, a wry smile touching her lips. "Getting fanciful in your old age, Amara," she murmured to herself. Her late grandmother, a woman steeped in the folklore of the region, had always insisted the Vale Forest was special, imbued with an ancient magic. She told tales of whispering trees, of spirits that guarded the woods, of werewolves that roamed under the full moon. Amara had listened, enchanted as a child, but dismissed them as charming, albeit outlandish, stories as an adult. Yet, tonight the whisper persisted. It wasn't just the wind. It felt like a voice, a chorus of voices, rustling through the leaves, weaving through the branches. "Amara, they have chosen," a shiver traced its way down her spine, not entirely from fear, but from a strange, unsettling anticipation. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to ground herself in the familiar reality of the forest. The scent of pine sharpened, the earthy aroma intensified, and a new scent emerged, a wild, musky fragrance that hinted at something primal. When she opened her eyes, he was there. He stood at the edge of the clearing, bathed in the fading light that filtered through the dense canopy. He was tall, impossibly so, his silhouette a stark contrast against the deepening twilight. His hair was the color of raven's wings, falling in thick waves around his shoulders. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were silver, luminous, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun with an unnatural intensity. They held a depth, an ancient wisdom, and a haunting sadness that resonated with a part of her she thought long buried. He didn't move, didn't speak, simply watched her. His presence radiated a quiet power, a sense of controlled wildness that both terrified and intrigued her. Amara found herself unable to look away, caught in the magnetic pull of his gaze. Her heart, usually so calm, so resigned, hammered against her ribs. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rustling of the leaves and the frantic beat of her own heart. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Finally, he moved, stepping closer with a grace that belied his size. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if he were approaching something sacred, something fragile. He stopped a few feet away, his silver eyes searching hers. "You have heard them," he murmured. His voice was low, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath her feet. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Amara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Heard what?" she managed to ask, her voice a mere whisper. He tilted his head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his lips. The trees, he said, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding forest. The whispers. They have been calling your name for a long time, Amara Vale. She frowned, a mixture of confusion and disbelief swirling within her. I don't understand. You will, he said, his silver eyes holding hers captive. They have chosen you. And that means he paused, his gaze intensifying, a flicker of something that looked almost like hunger passing through his eyes. That I have found you. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Found her? Chosen her? For what? The logical part of her brain screamed at her to run, to flee from this strange, unsettling man and the impossible things he was saying. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for so long, felt a pull, a yearning, a sense of inevitability. He extended a hand towards her, his long, elegant fingers reaching out as if to bridge the gap between them. His touch, even before it connected with her skin, radiated a warmth, a strange, comforting energy that seemed to seep into her very soul. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. He met his gaze. His eyes were filled with an ancient sadness. My name is Reese, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. And your life, Amara Vale, is about to change forever. Before she could respond, before she could even process the implications of his words, a low growl echoed through the forest, followed by the snapping of twigs. Reese's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed, his body tensing like a predator about to strike. The warmth that had emanated from him vanished, replaced by a chilling alertness. He stepped in front of Amara, shielding her with his body. Stay behind me, he commanded, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. The air crackled with a new, more threatening energy. The whispers of the trees had stopped. An ominous silence had fallen. Something was coming, and Amara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life had indeed changed forever. Chapter 2. The Silver-Eyed Stranger. The growl intensified, closer now, a guttural rumble that vibrated through the forest floor. Reese remained a solid, unmoving wall between Amara and the unseen threat. His posture was taut, every muscle coiled, ready to spring. The silver of his eyes seemed to intensify, glowing with an almost supernatural light in the deepening gloom. Amara, despite her fear, found herself mesmerized by the raw power he exuded. It was a primal force, both terrifying and strangely compelling. What is it? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic beat of her heart. Reese didn't answer, his focus entirely on the direction of the sound. The snapping of twigs grew louder, closer. Then, two figures emerged from the dense undergrowth, their forms barely visible in the fading light. They were large, powerfully built, their movements swift and silent. They were men, Amara realized, but there was something off about them. Their eyes, like Reese's, held an unnatural gleam, but theirs was colder, crueler. Reese, one of the men said, his voice a low snarl. We've been looking for you. Reese didn't reply, his gaze fixed on the two men. The air crackled with tension, a palpable animosity that hung heavy in the silence. You know why we're here, the second man said, stepping forward. He was slightly taller than the first, his features sharper, more angular. A long, jagged scar ran down the side of his face, disappearing into his hairline. Leave, Gareth, Reese said, his voice a low, warning growl. She is under my protection. Gareth laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Protection? You? You're a disgrace to your bloodline, Reese. You've abandoned your duty, your pack. And for what? A human? He spat the last word as if it were a curse. Amara flinched at the venom in his voice. Human? What did that mean? And what did he mean by pack? The questions swirled in her mind, adding to the growing sense of unease and confusion. Reese's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. She is none of your concern, he said, his voice dangerously low. She is everything, Gareth countered, his eyes flickering towards Amara. She is the key, the one the prophecy foretold. And we will not allow you to interfere. Prophecy? Key? Amara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. This was madness. She was a librarian, a widow, a woman who lived a quiet, ordinary life. What prophecy could possibly involve her? The other man, who hadn't spoken yet, shifted his weight, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "We're not alone, Gareth," he said, his voice lower, more cautious. Gareth dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "Hunters. They're always lurking, but they won't interfere. Not tonight." Hunters? Amara's blood ran cold. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a terrifying picture. Werewolves. Rhys, Gareth, the other man, they were werewolves. The stories her grandmother had told her, the ones she had dismissed as folklore, were real. Rhys took a step forward, his body radiating a controlled fury. "I will not let you touch her," he said, his voice laced with steel. Gareth smiled, a cruel, predatory expression. "You have no choice, Rhys. You're outnumbered. And you're weak. You've lost your edge, living among the humans." He lunged, his movements blurring with inhuman speed. The other man followed close behind. Rhys met their attack, moving with a grace and power that defied his size. The forest erupted in a cacophony of snarls, growls, and the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. Amara watched in horrified fascination, her body frozen in place. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the brutal fight unfolding before her. Rhys was holding his own, his movements fluid and precise, but he was clearly outnumbered. He was strong, incredibly so, but Gareth and his companion were relentless, their attacks driven by a savage ferocity. A sharp cry of pain ripped through the air. Amara's heart leaped into her throat. Rhys had stumbled, a deep gash on his arm bleeding freely. Gareth seized the opportunity, slamming Rhys against a tree with brutal force. Rhys slumped to the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Gareth stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It's over, Rhys," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You should have stayed with your own kind." He raised his hand, his fingers curling into claws, ready to deliver the final blow. Amara, finally breaking free from her paralysis, screamed. "No." Her cry echoed through the silent forest, startling Gareth and causing him to hesitate for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Rhys needed. He surged to his feet, his eyes blazing with silver fire, and launched himself at Gareth with a renewed ferocity. The fight resumed, even more brutal than before. Amara watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She had to do something, anything, to help him. But what could she do? She was just a woman, unarmed, against two powerful werewolves. Suddenly, she remembered the small, silver penknife she always carried in her pocket, a gift from Thomas years ago. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking, her fingers clumsy with fear. As she finally grasped the cool metal of the knife, she saw Gareth land a blow that sent Rhys sprawling backward, crashing into the undergrowth. He didn't get up. Gareth turned his attention to Amara, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Now, little human," he said, his voice dripping with menace, "it's your turn." He started towards her, his eyes filled with a cold, cruel light. Amara stood her ground, her heart hammering in her chest, her hand gripping the penknife so tightly her knuckles were white. She knew it was a futile gesture, but she wouldn't go down without a fight. She would protect the strange, silver-eyed man who had somehow, inexplicably, become her protector. She took a shaky breath, bracing herself for the inevitable. But the attack never came. From behind Gareth, a low, guttural sound froze the air. It was a sound Amara now knew very well. A growl. A warning. Rhys was not finished. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The growl resonated deep within Amara's chest, a primal vibration that both terrified and strangely reassured her. Gareth froze, his back to Rhys, his body rigid with tension. He slowly turned, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw Rhys rising from the undergrowth. Reese was no longer the composed, controlled figure he had been earlier. He was a creature of pure instinct, his eyes blazing with a feral intensity, his body radiating a raw, untamed power. The wounds Gareth had inflicted were still visible, but they seemed to matter less now, as if his rage had fueled a deeper, more primal strength. Impossible, Gareth muttered, taking a step back.
You should be.
He didn't finish the sentence. Reese lunged, moving with a speed that defied the eye. He slammed into Gareth, sending him flying backward into a thicket of thorny bushes. The other werewolf, who had remained a silent observer during the previous exchange, hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering between Reese and his fallen companion. Then, with a snarl, he charged. Reese met him head-on, the two werewolves colliding in a blur of fur and claws. The fight was savage, brutal, a whirlwind of teeth and snarls. Amara watched, her heart in her throat, her hand still clutching the small penknife. She knew she should run, seek help, but she couldn't leave Reese. Not like this. The fight was short, sharp, and decisive. Reese, fueled by a rage that seemed to consume him, quickly overpowered his opponent. He pinned him to the ground, his jaws clamped around the other werewolf's throat. A sickening crunch echoed through the forest. Reese released his grip, his chest heaving, his eyes still blazing with that feral light. He turned his attention back to Gareth, who was struggling to free himself from the thorny bushes, his face and arms covered in scratches. You're a monster, Gareth gasped, his voice filled with fear. Reese didn't reply. He advanced on Gareth, his movements slow, deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Gareth scrambled backward, his eyes wide with terror. Stay away from me, he pleaded. Reese ignored him. He reached down, grabbed Gareth by the throat, and lifted him effortlessly off the ground. Gareth clawed at Reese's arm, his struggles futile against the werewolf's immense strength. Please, Gareth begged, his voice choked. Don't kill me. Reese held him there, suspended in the air, his silver eyes burning into Gareth's. Amara watched, her breath caught in her throat. She should feel pity for Gareth, she knew, but she couldn't. He had threatened her, attacked Reese. He deserved whatever fate awaited him. Reese's grip tightened. Gareth's struggles grew weaker. Amara waited for the inevitable, the final snap that would end Gareth's life. But it didn't come. Instead, Reese slowly lowered Gareth to the ground, releasing his grip. Gareth collapsed in a heap, coughing and gasping for air.
Why?
Gareth rasped, his voice barely audible.
Why didn't you?
Reese looked down at him, his expression unreadable. Because I am not like you, he said, his voice low and controlled. The feral light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a familiar sadness. I will not become a monster. He turned away from Gareth, his gaze settling on Amara. He walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. Amara stood her ground, her heart still pounding, but her fear slowly receding. She had seen the beast within him, the raw power he possessed, but she had also seen his restraint, his refusal to succumb to his darker instincts. He stopped in front of her, his silver eyes searching hers. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch in her throat. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. Are you all right? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Amara nodded, her voice still caught in her throat. She was not all right. She was terrified, confused, overwhelmed by everything that had happened.
But she was also alive, and she owed that to him.
He withdrew his hand, his gaze lingering on hers.
We need to leave, he said.
It's not safe here. She nodded again, trusting his judgment. He turned and started walking, leading her deeper into the forest, away from the scene of the fight, away from the bodies of the fallen werewolves. As they walked, Amara finally found her voice.
What was that all about?
She asked. The prophecy? The key? What did he mean? Reese didn't answer immediately. He walked in silence for a few moments, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Finally he spoke.
It's a long story, he said.
A story that goes back centuries to the very origins of our kind. Your kind? She asked. Werewolves? He nodded. We are not all like Gareth and his companion, he said. There are those of us who strive to live in peace, to coexist with humans. But there are others who believe we should rule, that humans are inferior, meant to be subjugated. And Gareth, he was one of those? Rhys nodded again. He was a member of a radical faction, a group that believes in an ancient prophecy, a prophecy that speaks of a human woman who will hold the key to unlocking a great power, a power that could tip the balance between our kind and yours. And I'm that woman? Amara asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Rhys stopped walking and turned to face her. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Something that looked almost like reverence. Yes, Amara, he said. You are. The weight of his words settled upon her, heavy and suffocating. She was the key, the object of a centuries-old prophecy, a pawn in a war between werewolves. It was too much to comprehend, too much to accept. A wave of weariness crashed down around her. She blinked, the forest blurring and doubling. I don't feel so good, she managed, her voice small. Rhys caught her as she swayed, his arms strong and sure around her. Rest now, Amara, he murmured, his voice a soothing balm against her fear. You are safe with me. His words were a promise, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of her new reality. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the darkness, to the exhaustion that had finally overtaken her. But even in the darkness, she could still feel his presence, his warmth, his strength. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember in the ashes of her old life. The forest, no longer silent, hummed with the promise of a new dawn, a new life, a new destiny. And as she drifted off, she knew she would need to hear the whole story. She would need to understand why the trees whispered her name. Chapter 4. A Pact Made in Moonlight. Amara awoke to the scent of wood smoke and pine. She was lying on a soft bed of furs, tucked inside a small, rustic cabin. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the sounds of birdsong and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. For a moment, she felt a sense of peace, a blissful ignorance of the events of the previous night. Then, the memories flooded back, sharp and vivid, and her heart began to race. She sat up, her eyes scanning the cabin. It was sparsely furnished, with a simple wooden table and chairs, a stone fireplace where a small fire crackled merrily, and a few shelves holding various herbs and dried flowers. Rhys was nowhere to be seen. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. She was wearing a soft, oversized shirt that wasn't hers. It smelled faintly of Rhys, of wood smoke and that unique, musky scent that she now associated with him. She blushed, realizing he must have undressed her and put her to bed. The door creaked open, and Rhys entered, carrying a steaming mug. He saw her awake and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his silver eyes and softened his features. You're awake, he said, his voice a low rumble. How are you feeling? Better, she said, her voice a little hoarse. Where am I? My cabin, he said, handing her the mug. It's deep in the forest, far from prying eyes. She took the mug, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt of warmth shot up her arm, a strange, unfamiliar sensation. She took a sip of the warm liquid. It was a herbal tea, sweet and earthy, with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. Thank you, she said, looking up at him. For everything. He nodded, his gaze lingering on hers. You were brave last night, he said. Most humans would have panicked, run away. I had a penknife, she said, a wry smile touching her lips. He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that sent a shiver down her spine. A formidable weapon, he said, his eyes twinkling. The amusement faded from his face, replaced by a serious expression. We need to talk, Amara, he said. About the prophecy, about what it means for you, for us. She nodded, her heart sinking. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she still dreaded it. She wasn't ready for this, for any of this. He sat down on a chair opposite her, his gaze fixed on hers. The prophecy speaks of a woman, a descendant of the Vale line, who will be born with the ability to hear the whispers of the forest, to communicate with the ancient spirits that dwell within it, he began. This woman, the prophecy says, will hold the key to unlocking a power that has been dormant for centuries, a power that could either save our kind or destroy us all. And you believe I'm that woman? Amara asked, her voice laced with skepticism. The trees have chosen you, Amara, Reese said. They speak your name. That is proof enough. But why me? She asked. I'm just ordinary. Reese shook his head. You are anything but ordinary, Amara, he said, his voice soft. You have a strength within you, a resilience that you may not even be aware of. And you have a connection to this forest, to its magic, that is unlike anything I have ever seen. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. The prophecy also speaks of a bond, he continued. A bond between the chosen woman and a werewolf, a protector, a guardian who will guide her, protect her, and help her unlock her full potential. And you're that protector? Amara asked, her heart beating faster. Reese nodded. I am, he said, his silver eyes holding hers captive. Our fates are intertwined, Amara. Whether we like it or not. The weight of his words settled upon her, heavy and inescapable. A bond. A fated connection. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. She looked at Reese, at his strong, handsome features, at the sadness and the strength that resided in his silver eyes, and she felt a pull, a yearning, a sense of belonging. But what does it all mean? She asked. What is this power? And what am I supposed to do with it? Reese sighed, running a hand through his thick, dark hair. That is what we need to discover, he said. The prophecy is vague, its meaning shrouded in mystery. But I believe the answers lie within the forest, within its ancient secrets. He stood up, his movements fluid and graceful. Come, he said, extending a hand towards her. Let me show you. She hesitated for a moment, her mind still reeling from everything he had told her. But she trusted him. She had seen his strength, his protectiveness, his refusal to succumb to his darker instincts. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His touch was warm and strong, sending a jolt of energy through her. He led her out of the cabin, into the heart of the forest. The sun was high in the sky, filtering through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The air was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the gentle murmur of the stream. Reese led her to a clearing, a hidden sanctuary bathed in sunlight. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak, its branches reaching up to the sky like gnarled arms. It was the same tree she had leaned against the previous night, the tree that had seemed to whisper her name. This is where it began, Reese said, his voice hushed with reverence. This is where the trees first spoke to you. He gestured towards the tree. Close your eyes, Amara, he said. Listen to the whispers. Let them guide you. She hesitated for a moment, feeling foolish, unsure. But she trusted Reese. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to clear her mind of all the doubts and fears that plagued her. At first, she heard nothing but the sounds of the forest, the familiar sounds she had always known. But then, slowly, gradually, she began to hear something else. A faint whisper, a rustling of leaves that wasn't caused by the wind. A voice, a chorus of voices, weaving through the branches, calling her name. Amara, she gasped, her eyes flying open. I hear them, she whispered. Reese smiled, a knowing smile that reached his eyes. You are beginning to understand, he said. You are beginning to awaken. A new voice joined the chorus, harsh and unwelcome. Reese, she is not ready. The pact is flawed. Amara's eyes flicked to Reese. What pact? She said with a steady voice, masking the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. What did they mean? Reese looked away, unable to look her in the eye. The pact was a shameful secret, a desperate gambit, and it was about to be revealed. Chapter 5. The Curse of the Veil. Reese's hesitation, his unwillingness to meet her gaze, spoke volumes. The easy camaraderie that had begun to develop between them fractured, replaced by a chilling unease. The whispers of the trees, which had moments ago felt welcoming, now seemed to carry a warning, an undercurrent of something dark and hidden. "Reese," Amara repeated, her voice firmer this time. "What pact? What haven't you told me?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping with a weariness that seemed to age him before her eyes. He finally looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a profound sadness, a regret that cut her to the core. "It's a story I never wanted to tell you," he began, his voice low and heavy. "A story of my ancestors, of a curse that has haunted the Vale line for generations." He led her to a moss-covered stone near the base of the ancient oak, gesturing for her to sit. He sat beside her, but a distance remained between them, a chasm created by the unspoken secret. "Centuries ago," he began, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of the moss, "the Vale family was one of the most powerful in this region. They were known for their connection to the forest, for their ability to harness its magic. But their power attracted envy and enemies." He paused, taking a deep breath. A rival family, the Blackwoods, sought to destroy the Valas and claim their power for themselves. They were practitioners of dark magic, skilled in the arts of curses and hexes. Amara listened, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard whispers of this story before, fragments of local legend, dismissed as fanciful tales. But now, hearing it from Reese, seeing the pain etched on his face, she knew it was all too real. "The Blackwoods launched a devastating attack on the Valas," Reese continued. "They slaughtered many, desecrated their sacred places, and cursed the remaining members of the family." "What kind of curse?" Amara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Reese looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "A curse of solitude," he said. "A curse that ensured no Vale would ever find lasting happiness, that they would always be alone, their loved ones taken from them by tragedy or fate." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. The curse had explained so much. Her grandmother's lonely widowhood, her own mother's early death, Thomas's tragic accident, was it all connected? Was it all part of this ancient curse? "But how does this relate to the prophecy?" she asked, her mind struggling to connect the dots. "To me, the Blackwoods, in their arrogance, believed they had extinguished the Vale line," Reese said. "But a few survived, hidden, protected by the forest itself. And the prophecy, it was a whispered hope, a promise that one day, a Vale descendant would be born who could break the curse, who could restore the family's honor and power." "And that's me," Amara said, a statement, not a question. Reese nodded. "But the Blackwoods, anticipating this possibility, added a clause to their curse," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A pact." "A pact with whom?" Amara asked, dread filling her heart. Reese hesitated, his jaw tightening. "With the werewolves," he said, his voice barely audible. "With my ancestors." Amara frowned, confused. "I don't understand." The Blackwoods knew that the Vale descendant who could break the curse would need a protector, a powerful ally, Reese explained. "So they forged a pact with the werewolf pack that roamed these lands, a pact that bound the werewolves to protect the Valas, but also to control them." "Control them?" Amara asked, her voice rising in alarm. Reese nodded, his eyes filled with shame. "The pact stipulated that the werewolf alpha of each generation would be bound to the Vale descendant who could break the curse," he said. "Bound as a mate." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "Mate?" The word echoed in her mind, a terrifying implication. She was bound to Reese? Not by choice, not by love, but by an ancient curse. A forced pairing? "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." Reese looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "It is true, Amara," he said. "I am the alpha of my pack. And you are my fated mate." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Amara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her freedom, her choice, her very life, it was all a lie. She was a pawn in an ancient game, a prisoner of a curse she hadn't even known existed. She stood up abruptly, her legs shaking. She needed to get away, to think, to process this impossible revelation. I need some air, she said, her voice trembling. She turned and walked away, stumbling blindly through the forest, her mind reeling. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed to escape the suffocating weight of the curse, of the forced bond, of Reese's revelation. The trees whispered around her, their voices no longer soothing, but mocking, taunting. The pact, the curse you cannot escape. She ran faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps, tears streaming down her face. She ran until she could run no more, collapsing at the base of a giant redwood, her body shaking with sobs. She was trapped,
bound,
destined to a life she hadn't chosen, a love she didn't feel. The forest, once her sanctuary, had become her prison. And Reese, the man she had begun to trust, the man who had saved her life, was now her jailer. Or so she thought. The whispers changed, softer, more urgent. Not jailer, protector, chosen. One break, the curse, the last whisper faded to silence, leaving Amara alone with her despair, the weight of the ancient curse pressing down on her like a physical burden. It was too much. She was too old, too tired, too heartbroken to fight. She curled up, wanting only to disappear. Chapter 6. Hidden Truths Unveiled. Amara remained huddled at the base of the redwood, lost in a whirlwind of despair and confusion. The forest, once a source of comfort, now felt like a suffocating presence, its whispers a constant reminder of the curse that bound her. She had lost track of time, her mind replaying Reese's words, each repetition driving the reality of her situation deeper into her heart. A twig snapped nearby, startling her. She looked up, expecting to see Reese, but instead, a different figure emerged from the shadows. It was an old woman, her face deeply wrinkled, her eyes as bright and sharp as a hawk's. She wore a long, flowing dress of deep green and a silver necklace adorned with a single, intricately carved wolf pendant. Amara recognized her instantly. It was Alara, a recluse who lived on the edge of town, a woman rumored to be a witch, a keeper of ancient lore. Amara had seen her occasionally at the library, browsing the dusty shelves of history and folklore, but they had never spoken. Alara? Amara asked, her voice hoarse. The old woman nodded, her gaze piercing. I've been watching you, Amara Vale, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. I've been waiting for you. Amara frowned, confused. Waiting for me?
Why?
Alara approached, her movements slow but steady. She sat down beside Amara, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. The forest has been whispering your name for a long time, she said. I heard it, even when you didn't. You know about the curse? Amara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alara nodded. The curse of the veil, she said. A cruel legacy, a burden passed down through generations. Reese told me, Amara said, her voice filled with bitterness. He told me about the pact, about how I'm bound to him. Alara's expression softened. He told you the truth, Amara, she said. But not the whole truth. Amara looked at her, a flicker of hope igniting within her. What do you mean? Alara took a deep breath, her gaze turning towards the towering redwood. The pact was forged out of desperation, a bargain made in the darkness, she said. But it was not without its loopholes, its hidden clauses. Loopholes? Amara asked, her heart beating faster. Alara nodded. The Blackwoods, in their arrogance, believed they had covered all possibilities, she said. But they underestimated the power of the forest, the resilience of the Vale spirit. She turned to Amara, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. The pact binds you to Reese, yes, she said. But it does not bind your heart. It does not dictate your feelings. It does not force you to love him. Amara's breath caught in her throat. But he said what he believed to be true, Alara interrupted. What he has been taught since birth. But the werewolves, like the Valas, have forgotten much of the old ways, much of the true meaning of the pact. She reached out, taking Amara's hand in hers. Her touch was surprisingly warm, comforting. The pact is a bond of protection, Amara, she said. It ensures that Rhys will always be there to defend you, to guide you. But it does not force you to accept him as your mate. That choice that is yours and yours alone. Amara's mind reeled. This changed everything. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't forced to love Rhys. She had a choice.
But the prophecy, she said.
The power, how can I break the curse if I don't? The prophecy speaks of a bond. Yes, Alara said. But it does not specify the nature of that bond. It can be a bond of love, of friendship, of mutual respect.
It does not have to be a forced mating.
She squeezed Amara's hand. The power to break the curse lies within you, Amara, she said. Within your connection to the forest, within your ability to hear its whispers. Rhys can help you, guide you, but he cannot control you. He cannot force you to unlock your power. Alara stood, a spark of resolution in her bright eyes. The choice is, and has always been, yours. The Blackwoods sought dominion. That doesn't mean you must accept their terms. She pointed at the distant form of the cabin, barely visible through the trees. Rhys has carried the weight of his ancestors' guilt. The belief that he must control you. That is his curse, not yours. A wave of understanding washed over Amara. Rhys's actions, his protectiveness, his reluctance to reveal the full truth. It wasn't about control. It was about fear. Fear of failing his ancestors, fear of losing her, fear of the prophecy itself. He's afraid, Amara whispered, more to herself than to Alara. Alara nodded.
He is, she said.
But he is also a good man, Amara. A man who has been burdened by a legacy he never asked for. She smiled, a knowing smile that reached her eyes. Go to him, Amara, she said.
Talk to him.
Tell him what you have learned. Tell him about your choice. She turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the forest, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts. The whispers of the trees seemed to change, softer now, more encouraging. Choice, freedom, love. Amara stood up, her legs still a little shaky, but her heart filled with a newfound determination. She wasn't a pawn. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a Vale, a descendant of a powerful line, a woman who could hear the whispers of the forest. And she had a choice. She started walking towards the cabin, her steps slow but steady. She would talk to Rhys. She would tell him about Alara's words, about the hidden truths of the pact. She would tell him that she had a choice, and that she would not be forced into anything. As she approached the cabin, she saw Rhys standing outside, his back to her, his shoulders slumped. He looked lost, defeated. She felt a pang of sympathy for him, a flicker of understanding. He was a victim of the curse, just as she was. She called his name. He started, and when he faced her, his face was filled with self-loathing, but underlying that, a love so profound. Amara gasped. It was a truth revealed. And a choice remained. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Rhys turned, his silver eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The self-loathing Amara had glimpsed a moment before was quickly masked, replaced by a carefully guarded expression. He had expected her to run, to disappear into the town, to reject him and the burden of the pact. He hadn't expected her to return. Amara, he said, his voice a low rumble. I thought you'd gone. I needed some time, she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. To think. To understand. He nodded, his jaw tightening. And have you? I've learned some things, she said, stepping closer. Things you didn't tell me. His eyes flickered with unease. What things? About the pact, she said. About the choice I have. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the forest floor. There is no choice, Samara, he said, his voice heavy. The pact is binding. That's not what Alara told me, she said. His head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise. Alara? You spoke to Alara? Amara nodded. She told me the truth, she said. The whole truth. About how the pact doesn't bind my heart, only my protection. Rhys was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be struggling with something internal, a conflict that raged beneath his calm exterior. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. Alara is a wise woman, he said. But she is also unconventional. She doesn't always adhere to the traditional interpretations. She told me the werewolves have forgotten much of the old ways, Amara said. That you've been taught to believe you must control me, that it's your duty. Rhys flinched, as if her words had struck a physical blow. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. It's not about control, Amara, he said, his voice raw. It's about responsibility. I am bound to protect you, to guide you, to help you fulfill the prophecy. But not to force me, Amara said. Not to make me your mate against my will. He closed his eyes, his body shaking slightly. I would never force you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I would never want you to be unhappy. He opened his eyes, his gaze locking with hers. I care for you, Amara, he said, his voice filled with a raw honesty that took her breath away. More than I ever thought possible. But I also know that I am not what you deserve. I am a creature of the shadows, bound by a curse, a monster. Amara's heart ached for him. She saw the pain, the self-loathing, the fear that consumed him. He was a victim of the curse, just as she was, trapped by a legacy he hadn't chosen. She stepped closer, reaching out and taking his hand in hers. His touch was warm and strong, a grounding presence in the swirling chaos of her emotions. You are not a monster, Rhys, she said, her voice soft. You are a good man. A man who has been burdened by a terrible weight. He looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. But the prophecy speaks of a bond, Amara said. But it doesn't define that bond. It can be a bond of friendship, of mutual respect, of something else. Something we choose together. A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes, a fragile ember in the darkness of his despair. You would consider? I would consider getting to know you, Rhys, she said, her voice firm. Not as my fated mate, not as my protector, but as you. The man behind the curse, the man behind the wolf. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his features. I would like that very much, he said, his voice a low rumble. He squeezed her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. The tension that had been building between them eased, replaced by a fragile sense of hope, of possibility. But their newfound peace was short-lived. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying a chilling whisper that made the hairs on the back of Amara's neck stand on end. The storm is coming, the Blackwoods, they know. Rhys's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, his body tensing like a predator sensing danger. They're here, he said, his voice grim. Amara's blood ran cold. The Blackwoods. The family that had cursed the Valles, the ones who sought to control her power. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Rhys released her hand, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding forest. We fight, he said, his voice laced with steel. We protect what is ours. He turned to her, his silver eyes blazing with a fierce determination. I will not let them take you, Amara, he said. I will not let them harm you. I swear it. His words were a promise, a vow, a declaration of war. The storm had arrived. The Blackwoods were coming. And Amara knew that her life, her destiny, her newfound connection with Rhys were all about to be tested. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. A sense of foreboding, heavy and thick, filled the air. They weren't just coming. They were close. Chapter 8. Bonds of Blood and Spirit. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made Amara's skin crawl. The whispers of the trees intensified, a cacophony of warnings and fear, swirling around them like a vortex. Rhys stood beside her, a solid, protective presence, his body radiating a controlled power that both terrified and reassured her. They're close, he said, his voice low and urgent. We need to prepare. He led her back inside the cabin, his movements swift and efficient. He gathered various herbs and dried flowers from the shelves, placing them in a small pouch. He then retrieved a long, curved knife from beneath the bed, its blade gleaming in the firelight. What are you doing? Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly.
Preparing defenses, he said.
Wards against dark magic, and a weapon just in case. He worked quickly, his movements precise and deliberate. He drew symbols on the floor with charcoal, chanted low incantations in a language Amara didn't understand, and scattered the herbs around the perimeter of the cabin. "Will it be enough?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the knife in his hand. He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of determination and uncertainty.
"It will help," he said.
"But the Blackwoods are powerful. They have been practicing dark magic for centuries." He sheathed the knife, his gaze lingering on hers. "Stay inside," he said. "Stay close to the fire. And whatever happens, don't open the door for anyone but me." His words sent a shiver down her spine. The reality of their situation, the danger they faced, was becoming more and more apparent. He stepped outside, his body silhouetted against the fading light. He stood there for a moment, his head lifted, his senses alert, scanning the surrounding forest. Then he began to change. Amara watched, her breath caught in her throat, as Reese transformed into his wolf form. It was a swift, fluid movement, a rippling of muscles, a shifting of bones, a transformation that defied the laws of nature. The man she knew disappeared, replaced by a magnificent creature of pure instinct, a powerful wolf with fur as dark as night and eyes that glowed with a silver fire. He let out a low growl, a warning to any who dared approach. Then, he turned and looked at Amara, his gaze lingering on hers for a moment. It was a look of reassurance, of protection, of love. He turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest, his movements silent and swift. Amara was left alone, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She was trapped inside the cabin, surrounded by wards and symbols she didn't understand, waiting for an attack she couldn't comprehend. She sat down beside the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts, trying to focus on the whispers of the trees, on the connection she had with the forest. Protect, defend, unite. The whispers were faint, fragmented, but they offered a glimmer of hope, a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a victim, a pawn in an ancient game. She had a role to play, a power to wield. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. She thought of Reese, of his courage, his protectiveness, his willingness to defy his own kind to defend her. She thought of Alara, of her wisdom, her guidance, her belief in Amara's strength. She was not alone. She had allies, protectors, friends. And she had a connection to the forest, to its ancient magic that was stronger than she had ever imagined. A sudden crash outside startled her. She jumped to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. The Blackwoods had arrived. She heard snarls, growls, the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. The fight had begun. She wanted to run, to hide, to escape the terrifying sounds of the battle raging outside. But she couldn't. She had to stay put, to trust in Reese, to trust in the wards he had created. The sounds of the fight intensified, closer now, right outside the cabin. She heard a voice, a cold, cruel voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "Come out, little Vale," the voice hissed. "We know you're in there." Amara pressed her back against the wall, her body trembling. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the terrifying voice, trying to focus on the whispers of the trees. Protect, defend, unite. The whispers grew stronger, louder, more insistent. They filled her mind, her body, her soul. They gave her strength, courage, a sense of purpose. The door rattled, the wood creaking, testing the magical boundaries set. She remained still and focused on the flames. A sudden warmth, a connection, the feeling of something old, something familiar, came flooding in. She wasn't just hearing the whispers. She felt them. And she wasn't alone in the cabin anymore. "We are with you," Amara gasped, opening her eyes. The fire in the fireplace flared brightly and a figure, hazy and shimmering, coalesced. It was the form of a woman, an ancient veil, and her eyes, filled with power, held a familiar silver sheen. The door burst open, but standing there was not a Blackwood. It was Reese, battered, bleeding, but his eyes alive with a desperate, protective fury. Chapter 9. Shadows of Doubt. Rhys stumbled into the cabin, his body covered in cuts and bruises, his fur matted with blood. He slammed the door shut behind him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His eyes, usually of vibrant silver, were clouded with pain and exhaustion, but they still held that fierce, protective fire that Amara had come to recognize. "Are you all right?" Amara rushed to his side, her hands hovering over his wounds, unsure of what to do. He nodded, wincing as he shifted his weight. "They're strong," he said, his voice strained. "More than I anticipated." Amara's gaze fell on the figure shimmering beside the fireplace. Rhys followed her gaze, and his eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with a profound understanding. "Grandmother?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. The shimmering figure nodded, her silver eyes, so like Rhys's, filled with a gentle warmth. "I am here, child," she whispered, her voice a rustling of leaves, a murmur of wind, audible only to Amara and Rhys. "We're here." Amara felt a surge of strength, a sense of connection that transcended the physical realm. The ancient spirits of the Vale, of her ancestors, were with her, lending their power, their guidance. "Who?" Amara began, but Rhys cut her off. "Later," he said, his gaze fixed on the door, which was now rattling violently under the assault of the Blackwoods. "We need to hold them off." Long enough for he didn't finish the sentence. The door burst open, splintering into pieces, revealing two figures standing in the doorway. They were tall and imposing, their faces masked by shadows, their eyes gleaming with a cold, cruel light. They were Blackwoods, no doubt, radiating an aura of dark magic that made Amara's skin crawl. "So, the little Vale is finally found," one of the Blackwoods said, his voice a low snarl. "And the traitorous wolf protecting his prize." "She is not your prize," Rhys growled, stepping in front of Amara, shielding her with his body. "She is under my protection." "Protection?" The other Blackwood scoffed. "You are weak, Rhys. You have strayed from your true path. You have defiled your bloodline." "I have chosen my own path," Rhys said, his voice laced with steel. "A path of honor, of loyalty, of love." His words seemed to hang in the air, a challenge, a declaration. The Blackwoods laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Love?" One of them sneered. "A weakness. A flaw. We will show you the true meaning of power." They lunged, their movements blurring with inhuman speed. Rhys met their attack, his body a whirlwind of fur and claws. The cabin erupted in a cacophony of snarls, growls, and the sickening thud of flesh against flesh. Amara watched, her heart in her throat, her mind racing. She wanted to help, to do something, but she felt helpless, powerless. She was just a woman, unarmed, against two powerful practitioners of dark magic. But then, she remembered the shimmering figure beside the fireplace, the ancient spirits of the Vale, their power flowing through her. She closed her eyes, focusing on their presence, on their whispers. Unite, channel, protect. She felt a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through her body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the fight raging before her. Rhys was holding his own, but he was clearly outnumbered. He was strong, incredibly so, but the Blackwoods were relentless, their attacks driven by a savage ferocity fueled by dark magic. One of the Blackwoods raised his hand, chanting an incantation in a guttural language. A bolt of dark energy shot towards Rhys, striking him in the chest. He cried out in pain, stumbling backward, his body convulsing. Amara screamed, her fear turning into a surge of righteous anger. She felt the power of the Vale ancestors flowing through her, intensifying, demanding to be released. She raised her hands instinctively, channeling the energy, focusing it on the Blackwood who had attacked Rhys. A wave of pure, white light emanated from her palms, striking the Blackwood with incredible force. He cried out in surprise and pain, stumbling backward, his body enveloped in a shimmering aura. The dark magic he had wielded dissipated, neutralized by Amara's power. The other Blackwood turned his attention to Amara, his eyes widening in disbelief. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as a weak, insignificant human. He had made a grave mistake. Yuhi snarled, his voice filled with rage. "You dare!" He raised his hand, preparing to unleash another attack, but before he could complete the incantation, Rhys lunged, his jaws clamping around the Blackwood's arm. A sickening crunch echoed through the cabin. The Blackwood screamed in agony, his arm hanging limp and useless. Rhys released his grip, his eyes blazing with a feral intensity. He turned his attention back to the other Blackwood, who was still recovering from Amara's attack. The fight resumed, but the tide had turned. Amara's intervention had shifted the balance, giving Rhys the advantage he needed. He fought with renewed vigor, his movements swift and precise, his attacks fueled by a righteous fury. The Blackwoods, weakened and disoriented, were no match for Rhys's combined strength and Amara's newfound power. They were quickly overwhelmed, defeated, their bodies collapsing to the floor, unconscious. Rhys stood over them, his chest heaving, his eyes still blazing with that feral light. He looked at Amara, his gaze filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse.
"You saved me."
But doubts remained. They had been too easy to find. And where were the others? A terrible dread started to build in Amara. "This isn't right," she said. "There should be more of them." Rhys, catching her fear, transformed back, wincing in pain. "Alara," he gasped. "She said to protect Alara. They're after her too." "She's the key." A sentence was left unfinished. The implications were clear. Amara's power was emerging, but Alara was the one who truly knew how to wield it. And the Blackwoods knew it. Chapter 10. The Heart's Awakening. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Alara, the wise woman, the keeper of ancient lore, was the true target. Amara's emerging powers were a distraction, a means to draw Rhys away from the one person who could truly unlock the secrets of the Veil prophecy. "We need to go," Amara said, her voice urgent, her fear for Alara overriding her own exhaustion and injuries. "We need to find her." Rhys nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. He struggled to his feet, his body protesting with every movement, but his eyes still held that fierce, protective fire. "I can track them," he said, his voice strained. "Their scent is still fresh." Despite his injuries, he began to shift back into his wolf form, the transformation slower this time, more painful, but still driven by an unwavering resolve. Amara watched, her heart aching for him, for the burden he carried, for the sacrifices he was willing to make. She reached out, her hand gently touching his fur, offering a silent gesture of support, of gratitude, of something more. A warmth spread through her, a connection that transcended the physical, a bond that was deepening with every shared danger, every shared victory. He looked at her, his silver eyes, now in their wolf form, filled with a depth of emotion that took her breath away. It was a look of understanding, of acceptance, of love. A love that had blossomed in the midst of chaos, a love that defied the ancient curse, a love that was freely chosen, not forced. He nudged her hand with his snout, a silent acknowledgement of her feelings, a silent promise. Then, he turned and headed out of the cabin, his movements still hampered by his injuries, but driven by an urgency that defied his pain. Amara followed close behind, her own body aching, her mind racing. She had to trust in Rhys, in his ability to track the Blackwoods, to find Alara before it was too late. They moved through the forest, Rhys leading the way, his nose to the ground, following the scent trail of the Blackwoods. The whispers of the trees guided them, warning them of obstacles, of dangers that lay ahead. Amara focused on the whispers, on her connection to the forest, on the power that flowed through her. She was no longer just a passive observer, a victim of circumstance. She was an active participant, a protector, a warrior. As they neared Alara's secluded cottage on the edge of town, they heard the sounds of a struggle, of shouts and cries, of the clash of magic. They quickened their pace, their hearts pounding in their chests. They arrived at the cottage to find a scene of chaos. The door had been blasted open, the windows shattered, the furniture overturned. Alara was fighting valiantly, her eyes blazing with power, her hands wielding ancient magic, but she was outnumbered, surrounded by at least 5 Blackwoods, their faces contorted with hatred and cruelty. Rhys let out a ferocious growl, launching himself into the fray, his body a whirlwind of fur and claws. He attacked with a savage intensity, driven by a desperate need to protect Alara, to protect the woman who held the key to breaking the curse. Amara, drawing upon the power of the Vale ancestors, joined the fight. She focused her energy, channeling it into waves of protective light, shielding Alara from the Blackwoods' attacks, disrupting their spells, creating openings for Rhys. The battle raged, a chaotic clash of light and darkness, of ancient magic and primal fury. Alara, despite her age, fought with a strength and skill that belied her years. She chanted incantations, summoned spirits, wielded the power of the forest to defend herself. But the Blackwoods were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. They pressed their attack, their dark magic slowly eroding Alara's defenses, chipping away at her strength. One of the Blackwoods managed to break through Alara's defenses, striking her with a bolt of dark energy. She cried out in pain, stumbling backward, her body convulsing. Amara screamed, her fear turning into a surge of righteous anger. She focused all her energy, all her power, on the Blackwood who had attacked Alara. A blinding beam of white light erupted from her hands, striking the Blackwood with incredible force, sending him flying backward, crashing into a wall. The other Blackwoods turned their attention to Amara, their eyes filled with rage and hatred. They had underestimated her, dismissed her as a weak, insignificant human. They would not make that mistake again. They converged on her, their dark magic coalescing, forming a swirling vortex of shadows, threatening to consume her. Amara stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, but her spirit unwavering. She was a Vale, a descendant of a powerful line, a woman who could hear the whispers of the forest. And she would not be defeated. She closed her eyes, drawing upon the power of her ancestors, on the love she felt for Rhys, for Alara, for the forest itself. She felt a surge of energy, a warmth that filled her body, a connection that transcended the physical, a bond that united her with the very essence of the Vale. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the approaching darkness. A voice, clear and strong, echoed in her mind, not just a whisper, but a command. Now, Amara, unleash the power, break the chains. With those words she released. Not a beam or a wave this time. This was all of it. The power of the Valas. The power of her blood, amplified by the bond she had with Rhys, who, in turn, funneled the raw energy of the forest into her heart. The cottage, the night, the world seemed to dissolve in white. And Amara, in that moment, truly understood the meaning of love, of sacrifice, of destiny. Chapter 11. A glimmer of hope. The world dissolved into a blinding white light, a surge of pure energy that emanated from Amara, consuming the cottage, the surrounding forest, everything within its reach. The Blackwoods cried out in terror and pain as the light washed over them, their dark magic dissolving, their bodies disintegrating, their very essence unmade. When the light subsided, Amara stood amidst the devastation, her body trembling, her energy depleted, but her spirit soaring. The Blackwoods were gone, vanquished, their threat extinguished. The cottage was in ruins, but Alara was alive, lying on the ground, weakened but conscious. Rhys, in his wolf form, stood beside her, his fur singed, his body battered, but his silver eyes filled with relief and pride. Amara rushed to Alara's side, kneeling beside her, her hands hovering over her wounds, unsure of what to do. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Alara smiled weakly, her eyes twinkling with a familiar warmth. "I'll be fine, child," she said, her voice raspy. Thanks to you, and to Reese. Reese nudged Amara's hand with his snout, a silent gesture of gratitude, of reassurance. He then shifted back into his human form, wincing in pain as his bones rearranged themselves. He knelt beside Amara, his gaze fixed on Alara. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said, his voice strained. Somewhere we can tend to your wounds. There's a hidden chamber, Alara said, her voice weak. Beneath the cottage. A place of ancient power. It's protected from most intrusions. Reese nodded, understanding. He carefully lifted Alara into his arms, his movements gentle despite his own injuries. Amara followed close behind, her gaze sweeping over the ruined cottage, her mind still reeling from the power she had unleashed. Reese carried Alara to a section of the ruined floor where he pressed a hidden stone, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. They descended into the chamber, the air growing cooler, the silence deepening. The chamber was small and circular, its walls lined with ancient carvings, its floor covered in a mosaic of intricate symbols. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, bathed in a soft, ethereal light that emanated from an unknown source. Reese gently placed Alara on the altar, his hands hovering over her wounds. Amara watched, her heart filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The chamber felt alive, pulsating with an ancient energy that resonated with her own newfound power. This place Amara began, her voice hushed. It's a nexus of power, Alara said, her voice stronger now, as if she were drawing strength from the chamber itself. A place where the veil between worlds is thin. A place where the spirits of the Veil ancestors gather. As if in response to her words, shimmering figures began to appear in the chamber, faint at first, then growing more solid, more distinct. They were the spirits of the Veil ancestors, men and women, their faces ancient, their eyes filled with wisdom and power. Amara recognized the woman from the cabin, the one with the silver eyes, Reese's grandmother. She smiled at Amara, a gentle, reassuring smile. You have done well, child, she whispered, her voice a chorus of rustling leaves, a murmur of wind. You have unleashed the power. You have begun to break the curse. But how? Amara asked, her voice filled with confusion. How do I break it completely? Alara, who was sitting up now, her wounds seemingly healing before their eyes, spoke. The curse is tied to the Blackwood bloodline, she said. Their power was the source of the curse, and their destruction has weakened it significantly. But not broken it, Reese said, his voice filled with a familiar sadness. The pact still remains. Alara nodded. The pact is a bond of blood and spirit, she said. It cannot be broken easily. But it can be transformed. Transformed? Amara asked, her heart beating faster. The pact was forged out of darkness, out of hatred and control, Alara said. But it can be reforged, renewed, based on love, on trust, on free will. She looked at Amara, then at Reese, her eyes filled with a knowing wisdom. The bond between you two, she said. It is strong, powerful. It has been tested by fire, by darkness. It has emerged stronger, purer. But it's still a forced bond, Reese said, his voice laced with doubt. A legacy of the curse. It was, Alara corrected him. But it doesn't have to be. You have both shown that you are willing to defy the past, to forge your own future. You have chosen love over hate, freedom over control. She smiled, a radiant smile that filled the chamber with warmth. The power to break the curse completely lies within your hearts, she said. Within your love for each other, within your connection to the forest, within your willingness to choose your own destiny. She extended a hand to each of them. Take my hands, she instructed. Amara and Reese, hesitantly, followed her words. As their skin touched, a new surge of power, gentle but undeniable, flowed through them all. The whispers of the ancestors intensified, filling the chamber with a chorus of hope, of promise. Choose love, freedom, break the chains. Alara closed her eyes, and a soft glow emanated from her. The curse is not broken, she stated, her voice now strong and filled with certainty. but the path is clear. Live love, and in doing so, honor those who came before. That is how the veil line will truly be free. A glimmer of hope, a fragile promise, a future uncertain, but filled with the possibility of true love, true freedom. The chamber fell silent. The ancestors faded, leaving Amara and Rhys alone with Alara, the weight of their destiny and the promise of their love hanging heavy in the air. Chapter 12. The Price of Freedom. Alara's words hung in the air, a beacon of hope in the lingering darkness. The ancient chamber, once filled with the shimmering forms of ancestors, now felt quiet, expectant. The immediate threat was gone, the Blackwoods vanquished, but the long shadow of the curse still loomed, a reminder of the work that remained. Amara looked at Rhys, his silver eyes reflecting the ethereal light of the chamber, searching hers with a question he didn't need to voice. The bond between them, forged in darkness, tested by fire, was now something precious, something chosen, but it was also incomplete. The pact, though weakened, still held a thread of control, a whisper of obligation. "What do we do now?" Amara asked, her voice barely a whisper, breaking the silence. Alara, her strength seemingly restored by the energy of the chamber, opened her eyes. "The curse is tied to the land," she said, her voice firm, "to the very essence of the Vale Forest. To break it completely, you must cleanse the land, heal the wounds inflicted by the Blackwoods."
How?
Rhys asked, his gaze fixed on Alara. "The Blackwoods are gone. Their magic extinguished. Their magic may be gone," Alara said, "but their darkness lingers. It has poisoned the land, corrupted the ancient spirits. You must find the places where their power was strongest, where their rituals were performed, and cleanse them." "And how do we find these places?" Amara asked. Alara smiled, a knowing smile. "The forest will guide you," she said. "The trees will whisper. You must listen." She stood up, her movements surprisingly strong and steady. "I will help you," she said. "I will guide you as much as I can. But ultimately, it is up to you. You are the ones who must wield the power, who must heal the land." They left the hidden chamber, emerging back into the ruined cottage. The dawn was breaking, casting a pale light over the devastation. The forest, though still bearing the scars of the battle, seemed to breathe easier, its whispers softer, more hopeful. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly, guided by the whispers of the trees, by Alara's wisdom, by the growing connection between Amara and Rhys. They found the places where the Blackwoods had performed their dark rituals, hidden groves, desecrated springs, ancient stones stained with blood. At each location, they performed cleansing rituals, drawing upon Amara's newfound power, channeling the energy of the Vale ancestors, guided by Alara's knowledge of ancient lore. They chanted incantations, burned herbs, offered prayers to the spirits of the forest, seeking to heal the wounds, to restore the balance. It was arduous work, emotionally and physically draining. Amara often felt overwhelmed by the power flowing through her, by the responsibilities she carried. But Rhys was always there, a steady presence, a source of strength and support. He helped her channel the energy, guided her through the rituals, protected her from the lingering darkness that clung to the land. Their bond deepened with each passing day, their love growing stronger, more resilient. They worked together, fought together, healed together. They were no longer just fated mates, bound by a curse. They were partners, equals, lovers, choosing their own destiny, forging their own path. But the curse was not so easily vanquished. As they cleansed the land, they began to experience strange occurrences, unsettling events. The forest seemed to turn against them, its whispers turning harsh, its creatures hostile. Storms raged, paths shifted, shadows danced. One evening, as they were performing a cleansing ritual at a particularly dark and corrupted grove, they were attacked. Not by Blackwoods, but by twisted creatures of the forest, animated by the lingering darkness, their forms grotesque, their eyes filled with malice. Rhys fought valiantly, protecting Amara, but he was outnumbered, overwhelmed. Amara, drawing upon her power, tried to defend them, but the darkness was too strong, too pervasive. One of the creatures managed to break through their defenses, striking Reese with a poison claw. He cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground, his body convulsing. Amara screamed, her fear turning into a surge of desperate rage. She focused all her energy, all her power, on the creatures, unleashing a wave of pure, white light. The creatures shrieked, their forms dissolving, their darkness extinguished. But it was too late. Reese was gravely injured, the poison spreading rapidly through his system. Amara knelt beside him, her hands trembling, her heart breaking. "Reese," she cried, her voice filled with anguish. "Stay with me, please." He looked at her, his silver eyes clouded with pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "The curse," he whispered. "It's fighting back." Tears streamed down Amara's face. She cradled his head in her lap, her hands desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood from his wound. "I won't let you die," she said, her voice fierce. "I won't lose you." She focused all her energy, all her love, all her will, on healing him. She channeled the power of the Vale ancestors, the energy of the forest, pouring it into his body, fighting against the poison, against the curse. But it wasn't enough. The poison was too strong, the curse too deeply rooted. Reese's breathing grew shallower, his body weaker. His eyes, once so vibrant, began to dim. He was slipping away. Amara felt a wave of despair wash over her, a crushing sense of loss. She had come so far, fought so hard, only to lose him, to lose the one she loved. The forest, once again, was silent. Or was it? The price, a whisper, faint but undeniable, reached her. "Freedom has a price." Amara's heart froze. The price? What price? The answer slammed into her with sickening clarity. The bond. Their bond. It was the last tether of the curse. Chapter 13. Trials of the Heart. The whisper echoed in Amara's mind, a chilling revelation that sent a wave of ice through her veins. The price. Freedom has a price. The bond. Their bond. The very connection that had given them strength, that had blossomed into love, was now the last tether of the curse, the final obstacle to true freedom. She looked at Reese, his life fading, his silver eyes dimming, and the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. To break the curse completely, to save Reese, she had to sever the bond, to sacrifice the very thing she held most dear. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. It was an impossible choice, a cruel irony. She had fought so hard, come so far, only to be faced with a sacrifice that seemed unbearable. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another way." But even as she spoke the words, she knew there wasn't. The poison was spreading too rapidly, Reese's life was slipping away, and the curse, the ancient, malevolent force that had haunted the Vale line for centuries, was clinging to their bond, to their love, as its last lifeline. She looked at Reese, his face pale, his breathing shallow, his eyes barely open. He was trying to speak, to say something, but his voice was too weak. She leaned closer, her ear next to his lips. "Save yourself," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let me go." He knew. He understood the price. And he was willing to pay it, to sacrifice himself to free her, to free the Vale line from the curse. Tears streamed down Amara's face, hot and bitter. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let him go. She loved him, with every fiber of her being, with every beat of her heart. But she also knew that she had to. She had to be strong, for him, for the Vale ancestors, for the future. She had to make the ultimate sacrifice. She closed her eyes, drawing upon the power of the Vale ancestors, on the energy of the forest, on the love that filled her heart, even as it was breaking. She focused on the bond, on the connection that tied her to Reese, the invisible thread that pulsed with their shared life force. It was a beautiful thing, a powerful thing, a testament to their love, to their resilience. But it was also a chain, a shackle, a remnant of the curse. With a wrenching sob, she began to unravel the bond, to sever the connection, to tear apart the very fabric of their intertwined souls. It was agonizing, excruciating, like ripping out her own heart. She felt Rhys's life force weakening, his presence fading, his essence slipping away. She wanted to stop, to scream, to beg him to stay, but she couldn't. She had to finish what she had started. As the last thread of the bond snapped, a wave of energy surged through the forest, a mournful cry that echoed through the trees, a lament for a love lost, a sacrifice made. Rhys's body went limp, his breathing stopped, his silver eyes closed forever. He was gone. Amara collapsed beside him, her body racked with sobs, her heart shattered beyond repair. She had saved him from the poison, from the creatures, but she had lost him to the curse, to the price of freedom. She lay there for a long time, cradling his lifeless body, her tears soaking his fur, her grief consuming her. The forest was silent, mournful, its whispers stilled, its creatures hushed. But then, slowly, gradually, something began to change. A faint warmth spread through Amara's body, a gentle energy that pulsed from the earth beneath her, from the trees around her, from the very air she breathed. She looked down at Rhys, at his still face, his closed eyes, and she saw something that made her heart leap into her throat. A faint silver glow emanated from his body, a subtle shimmer that grew stronger, brighter, with each passing moment. She gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it was happening.
Rhys was changing.
His wounds were healing, his fur regaining its luster, his body regaining its strength. The silver glow intensified, enveloping him in a cocoon of light. Then, with a sudden gasp, his eyes opened. They were no longer clouded with pain, no longer dim. They were vibrant, alive, filled with that familiar silver fire, but different. Clearer. Unburdened. He looked at Amara, his gaze filled with a love that was even deeper, even purer than before. A love that was not bound by a curse, not tainted by obligation, but freely given, freely received. Amara, he whispered, his voice weak but clear. She stared at him, her mouth agape, her mind unable to comprehend what was happening. You're alive, she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, a weak but genuine smile.
The bond, it was the curse, he said.
You broke it. You freed us both. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. His touch was warm, real, alive.
But how?
She asked, her voice filled with confusion. You were gone. The forest, he said, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding trees. Your love. The ancestors. They intervened. He struggled to sit up, his body still weak, but his spirit strong. The curse is truly broken, Amara, he said. The veil line is free. And we are free to choose our own destiny. Tears streamed down Amara's face, tears of joy, of relief, of disbelief. She had lost him, and then, miraculously, she had found him again. The price of freedom had been steep, agonizing, but it had also been a rebirth, a renewal, a testament to the power of love, of sacrifice, of choice. It hadn't been severing the bond that had done it. It had been transforming it, purifying it, making it whole. The forest came alive with whispers. Free love chosen the trials were not over. But they were, at last, free to face them together. Chapter 14. The Unseen Enemy. The joy of Rhys's return was profound, a balm to Amara's shattered heart. The forest seemed to celebrate with them, its whispers turning joyful, its creatures emerging from their hiding places, its very essence radiating a newfound peace. But the peace was fragile, a thin veil over the lingering scars of the curse, over the knowledge that their trials were far from over. They returned to Alara, who greeted them with a mixture of relief and knowing wisdom. She had felt the breaking of the bond, the surge of energy, the momentary death and miraculous rebirth. She knew the price they had paid, the sacrifice they had made. The curse is broken, she confirmed, her eyes filled with a gentle warmth. The veil line is free, but there are always consequences, always ripples. The darkness may be vanquished, but its echoes remain. Her words were a sobering reminder that their journey was not yet complete. The Blackwoods were gone, their power extinguished, but the damage they had inflicted on the land, on the spirits, still lingered. And there were other forces at play, unseen enemies, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Over the next few weeks, they continued to work with Alara, learning more about the ancient lore of the Veil, about the power that Amara now wielded, about the responsibilities that came with it. They honed their skills, strengthened their connection to the forest, prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. Their love deepened, their bond, now free of the curse, transformed into something even more powerful, more profound. It was a love born of shared sacrifice, of mutual respect, of freely chosen commitment. It was a love that defied the darkness, a love that illuminated their path. But the unseen enemy was growing stronger, its presence felt in subtle ways. The forest, though mostly healed, still held pockets of darkness, places where the whispers turned harsh, where the creatures were restless. Strange occurrences plagued the nearby town, unsettling events, whispers of fear, a growing sense of unease. One evening, as Amara and Reese were walking through the forest, they stumbled upon a hidden clearing, a place they had never seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, covered in strange symbols. The air was heavy, oppressive, filled with a chilling presence that made Amara's skin crawl. "This place," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels wrong." Reese nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife he always carried. "It's a place of power," he said, his voice low. "But not veil power. Something else. Something darker." As they examined the stones, they realized that the symbols were not of veil origin, nor were they Blackwood. They were something different, something older, something more sinister. Suddenly, the air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and a figure emerged from the surrounding trees. It was a woman, tall and slender, her face hidden by a dark hood, her body cloaked in flowing robes. She radiated an aura of power, a chilling presence that made Amara's blood run cold.
"Who are you?"
Reese demanded, stepping in front of Amara, shielding her with his body. The woman smiled, a cruel, mocking smile. "You have broken the curse," she said, her voice a silken whisper. "You have freed the veil line, but you have also unleashed something else."
"What are you talking about?"
Amara asked, her voice trembling. The woman's smile widened. "The Blackwoods were not the only ones who sought to control the veil power," she said. "They were merely pawns, a means to an end."
"Who are you?"
Reese repeated, his voice laced with steel. The woman threw back her hood, revealing her face. It was a face of ethereal beauty, but her eyes were cold, devoid of emotion, filled with a chilling emptiness. "I am a servant of the Old Ones," she said. "The beings who existed before your kind, before the Valas, before the Blackwoods. The beings who ruled this land, who commanded the very elements." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. The Old Ones. She had heard whispers of them, legends, myths, dismissed as fanciful tales. But seeing this woman, feeling her power, she knew they were all too real. "What do you want?" Amara asked. "The veil power," the woman said. "It belongs to the Old Ones. It was stolen from them, and they want it back." "It belongs to no one," Reese said, his voice firm. "It is a part of the land, a part of the veil line."
"It is not yours to take."
The woman laughed, a cold, chilling sound. "You cannot stop us," she said. "We are many. We are powerful. And we are coming." She raised her hand, and the circle of stones began to glow with an eerie light. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. "This is just the beginning," the woman said, her eyes fixed on Amara. "The Old Ones will reclaim what is theirs, and you will be their instrument." With a final, mocking smile, she disappeared, vanishing into thin air, leaving Amara and Reese alone in the clearing, the circle of stones still glowing, the air heavy with a sense of impending doom. The whispers had returned. The old ones, they're coming, beware a new enemy. An ancient power. The trials were far from over. They had broken one curse, only to awaken something far more terrifying. Chapter 15. Whispers of Betrayal. The encounter with the servant of the old ones left Amara and Reese shaken, the weight of their new reality pressing down on them. They returned to Alara, relaying the woman's words, the chilling threat, the ominous circle of stones. Alara listened intently, her face grave, her eyes filled with a deep concern. The old ones, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I had hoped, I had prayed that they were merely a legend, a myth. They're real, Amara said, her voice trembling. And they want the veil power. They want to control it, Reese added, his jaw clenched with anger. To use it for their own purposes. Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. The old ones are beings of immense power, she said. Ancient entities that predate humanity, that predate even the werewolves. They ruled this land long ago, commanding the elements, wielding a magic that is beyond our comprehension. But how do we stop them? Amara asked, her voice filled with desperation. They're too powerful. We are not without our own strengths, Alara said. The veil power, the bond between you two, the connection to the forest, these are all weapons we can use. But the woman said they are many, Reese said. And she said we would be their instrument. How can we fight an enemy we don't understand, an enemy that can control us? Alara sighed, running a hand through her hair. The old ones are masters of manipulation, she said. They work in the shadows, whispering doubts, sowing discord, turning people against each other. They prey on weakness, on fear, on insecurity. Her words struck a chord with Amara. The woman's words, you will be their instrument, had lingered in her mind, a chilling premonition. Could they be controlled? Could their bond, their love, be twisted, corrupted, used against them? We need to learn more about them, Amara said. About their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. We need to understand how they operate. The ancient texts, Alara said. There are scrolls, hidden away, that contain knowledge of the old ones, of their history, of their magic. We must find them. Where are they? Reese asked. Alara hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the window, towards the town that lay nestled in the valley below.
Some are here, she said.
In the Vale Library, hidden in plain sight. Others are scattered, concealed in places of power, guarded by ancient spirits. Amara's heart sank. The library, her sanctuary, her haven, now a potential battleground. We'll start with the library, Reese said, his voice firm. It's the closest, the easiest to access. They decided to go that very night, under the cover of darkness. The town was quiet, asleep, unaware of the ancient forces gathering in the shadows. The library, usually a place of warmth and comfort, felt cold, ominous, filled with a sense of impending danger. Amara, using her key, unlocked the back door, and they slipped inside, their footsteps echoing in the silent halls. They made their way to the local history section, to the dusty shelves where the oldest, most obscure texts were kept. They searched for hours, poring over ancient scrolls, deciphering cryptic symbols, piecing together fragments of forgotten lore. They found references to the old ones, whispers of their power, hints of their weaknesses, but nothing concrete, nothing that offered a clear path to defeating them. As they searched, Amara felt a growing unease, a sense of being watched, of being manipulated. The whispers of the forest, usually a source of guidance, were now confused, discordant, filled with conflicting messages. She looked at Reese, his face illuminated by the dim light of his lantern, his brow furrowed in concentration. He seemed oblivious to her unease, focused solely on the task at hand. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the silent library, a cold, familiar voice that sent a shiver down Amara's spine. Looking for something? They turned to see the servant of the old ones standing in the doorway, her face hidden by her hood, her body cloaked in shadows. She was not alone. Beside her stood a figure Amara recognized, a figure that made her heart stop. It was Thomas. Her Thomas. Her fiancé, who had died 20 years ago. He looked exactly as she remembered him, his eyes kind, his smile gentle, his presence radiating a warmth that she had longed for, grieved for so long. "Thomas?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. He smiled at her, a loving smile that reached his eyes. "Amara," he said, his voice the same, the voice she had dreamed of, yearned for 2 decades. "I'm here." He held out a hand to her, his eyes begging her to come to him. Reese stiffened beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But Amara, blinded by grief, by longing, by the impossible reality of seeing Thomas again, didn't notice. She only saw the man she had loved and lost. The man whose death had shaped her entire world. The whispers of the trees intensified, screaming now. Betrayal, illusion, danger, but Amara was lost in the memory of a love, of a promise, that had died long ago. Or so she thought. Chapter 16. The Ancient Ritual. Amara's mind reeled, unable to reconcile the impossible sight before her. Thomas, her beloved Thomas, standing there, alive, whole, reaching out to her. The grief of 20 years, the constant ache of his absence, threatened to overwhelm her, to drown her in a wave of longing and disbelief. "Thomas," she repeated, her voice a choked whisper, her legs moving involuntarily, taking her towards him, towards the ghost of her past, the phantom of her dreams. Reese's growl intensified, a desperate warning, but Amara didn't hear him, didn't see the danger, didn't feel the cold, manipulative presence of the servant of the old ones standing beside Thomas. "Amara, don't." Reese's voice was sharp, urgent, but it seemed to come from a distant place, muffled, distorted, unable to penetrate the fog of grief and longing that clouded her mind. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Thomas's hand, expecting to feel the warmth of his skin, the familiar comfort of his touch. But instead, she felt a coldness, an emptiness, a void that sent a jolt of fear through her. His hand was not flesh and blood, but something else, something ethereal, something unreal. She looked at his face, at his eyes, and saw not the kindness, the love she remembered, but a blankness, an emptiness, a chilling reflection of the servant of the old one's own eyes. It was an illusion, a cruel deception, a manipulation of her deepest desires, her most profound grief. The old ones were using her love for Thomas, her loss, her vulnerability, against her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, snapping her out of the trance, breaking the spell. She recoiled, her hand flying back, her eyes widening in horror. "You're not him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not Thomas." The figure that resembled Thomas smiled, a cruel, mocking smile that mirrored the servant of the old one's own expression. "He is what you want him to be," the servant said, her voice a silken whisper. "He is a gift, a reward. Join us, Amara, and you can have him forever." Reese lunged, his body transforming into his wolf form, his fangs bared, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. He attacked the servant of the old ones, but his claws passed through her as if she were made of smoke. The figure of Thomas didn't move, didn't react, its eyes fixed on Amara, its hand still outstretched, offering a false promise, a cruel temptation. "Choose, Amara," the servant said. "Choose love. Choose happiness. Choose him." Amara's heart was torn, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She longed for Thomas, for the life they had lost, for the love they had shared. But she also knew that this was a lie, a deception, a trap. She looked at Reese, his wolf form a powerful, protective presence, his silver eyes filled with a love that was real, a love that had been tested by fire, a love that had chosen her, freely, without coercion. She made her choice. "He's not here," she said, her voice stronger now, her gaze fixed on the servant of the old ones. "And I will never join you." The figure of Thomas flickered, its form unstable, its smile fading. The servant of the Old One's expression turned to rage. "You fool," she hissed. "You choose a beast over your true love? You choose pain over happiness?" "I choose reality," Amara said, her voice firm. "I choose love that is real, not an illusion. I choose freedom, not servitude." With a surge of power, Amara focused her energy on the figure of Thomas, on the illusion, on the manipulation. A wave of white light emanated from her hands, striking the figure, dissolving it into nothingness. The servant of the Old Ones screamed in rage, her form flickering, her power waning. She turned to flee, but Rhys was too fast. He intercepted her, his jaws clamping down on her arm. She cried out in pain, but it was a sound of frustration, not agony. She was not flesh and blood, not entirely. She was a being of shadow, of magic, of manipulation. She vanished, disappearing into thin air, leaving Rhys with nothing but a lingering scent of darkness and a chilling echo of her laughter. The library was silent once more, the only sound Amara's and Rhys's ragged breathing. The illusion was gone, the threat momentarily averted, but the encounter had left its mark. Rhys shifted back into his human form, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Amara nodded, her body trembling, her heart still aching from the cruel deception. They used him," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "They used Thomas." Rhys put his arms around her, holding her tight. "They use what hurts us most," he said quietly. "Do not give them power over you." They knew they had to act quickly. The Old Ones were growing bolder, their attacks more frequent, their manipulations more insidious. They needed to find a way to stop them before they could unleash their full power, before they could turn Amara into their instrument. Alara told them of an ancient ritual, a way to fight back, a way to defend themselves, a way to potentially defeat the Old Ones. "It is dangerous," she warned. "It requires a sacrifice. But it could work." The ritual involved harnessing the power of the Vale Forest, of the ancient spirits, of the very earth itself. It required a conduit, a focus, a being who could channel the energy, who could wield the power. It required Amara. And it required a willing sacrifice from Rhys. An act of faith, of trust, of love, that would bind them together, irrevocably, in a way that even the curse had not. He would have to temporarily offer his life force, his very essence, to amplify Amara's power, to allow her to become a vessel for the ancient magic of the Vale. The risk was immense. But the alternative was unthinkable. Chapter 17. Into the Abyss. The weight of Alara's words settled upon them, a heavy burden of responsibility and fear. The ancient ritual, the willing sacrifice, the potential to defeat the Old Ones, it was a daunting prospect, a terrifying gamble. But the alternative, to stand by and watch as the Old Ones unleashed their power, as they twisted and corrupted the land, as they turned Amara into their instrument, was unthinkable. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering the necessary materials, studying the ancient texts, honing their skills, strengthening their connection to the forest, to each other. Alara guided them, instructing them in the intricacies of the ritual, warning them of the dangers, preparing them for the sacrifices they would have to make. The ritual had to be performed at the Circle of Stones, the place where the servant of the Old Ones had appeared, the place where their power was strongest. It was a dangerous location, a focal point of their dark magic, but it was also the only place where the ritual could be effective, where the veil between worlds was thin enough to access the ancient power. On the night of the full moon, they made their way to the clearing, their hearts pounding in their chests, their minds filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The Circle of Stones stood silent, ominous, bathed in the pale moonlight, radiating a chilling presence that made Amara's skin crawl. Alara began the ritual, chanting in the ancient language of the Vale, her voice resonating with power, her hands tracing intricate symbols in the air. She lit herbs, burned incense, offered prayers to the spirits of the forest, calling upon their aid, their guidance, their protection. Amara stood in the center of the circle, her eyes closed, her body trembling, feeling the energy of the forest flowing through her, intensifying with each passing moment. She focused on her connection to Rhys, on their love, on their shared purpose, on the sacrifices they were willing to make. Rhys stood beside her, his hand clasped tightly in hers, his silver eyes filled with a love that was unwavering, a trust that was absolute. He was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice, to offer his life force, his very essence, to amplify Amara's power, to allow her to become a vessel for the ancient magic of the Vale. As Alara's chanting reached a crescendo, Rhys began to transfer his energy to Amara, a slow, deliberate process, a willing surrender of his life force. He felt his body weakening, his strength fading, his essence flowing into her, merging with hers, becoming one. Amara felt his sacrifice, his love, his unwavering commitment. She felt his life force mingling with hers, amplifying her power, transforming her into something more. She felt a connection to the forest, to the ancient spirits, to the very earth itself, that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer her own. They glowed with an ethereal light, a silver fire that mirrored Rhys's, but amplified, intensified, imbued with the ancient power of the Vale. She raised her hands, and the circle of stones began to glow with the same eerie light, but now it was different. It was not the cold, malevolent light of the old ones, but a warm, protective light, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The air crackled with energy, the ground trembled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Amara felt herself being drawn into the ritual, into the vortex of power, into the abyss between worlds. She saw visions, images, fragments of the past, the present, the future. She saw the old ones, their ancient forms, their immense power, their insatiable hunger. She saw the servant of the old ones, her cruel smile, her chilling eyes, her manipulative words. She saw Thomas, his image flickering, unstable, a reminder of the loss, the grief, the deception. But she also saw Rhys, his unwavering love, his selfless sacrifice, his enduring strength. She saw Alara, her wisdom, her guidance, her unwavering belief in them. She saw the forest, its beauty, its resilience, its ancient power. She felt a surge of determination, a fierce resolve to fight, to protect, to defend. She would not let the old ones win. She would not let them control her, corrupt her, use her. She would wield the power of the Vale, the power of love, the power of sacrifice, to defeat them. She spoke, her voice not her own, but a chorus of voices, the voices of the Vale ancestors, the voices of the ancient spirits, the voice of the forest itself. "We are the Vale," she said, her voice resonating with power. "We are the guardians of this land. We will not yield. We will not be broken. We will fight." As she spoke the words, a wave of energy surged from her, from the circle of stones, from the very earth itself, a powerful force that pushed back the darkness, that challenged the old ones, that declared their defiance. She was falling, spiraling, into the heart of the ancient power. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The true battle was yet to come. And it would be fought not in the physical realm, but within the very fabric of existence. Chapter 18. A love worth fighting for. The sensation of falling intensified, a dizzying descent into a swirling vortex of light and shadow, of ancient power and primal fear. Amara felt herself losing control, her consciousness fading, her connection to the physical world, to Rhys, to Alara, growing weaker with each passing moment. She was entering the realm of the old ones, a place beyond human comprehension, a dimension where the laws of nature were twisted, where reality was fluid, where the very fabric of existence was malleable. She saw them, the old ones, their forms shifting, indistinct, yet terrifying in their immensity, their power palpable, their presence overwhelming. They were beings of pure energy, of ancient consciousness, of unimaginable power. They surrounded her, their voices echoing in her mind, a cacophony of whispers, of promises, of threats. They offered her power, knowledge, dominion over the world. They tempted her with visions of a future where she could rule alongside them, where she could shape reality to her will. But they also threatened her, showing her visions of destruction, of chaos, of the world consumed by darkness. They showed her Reese, suffering, dying, his life force extinguished, his love lost forever. They were testing her, probing her weaknesses, exploiting her fears, trying to break her, to control her, to turn her into their instrument. But Amara was not alone. Even in this alien realm, in this terrifying dimension, she felt a connection, a bond, a lifeline to Reese, to Alara, to the forest, to the Vale ancestors. She felt Reese's love, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness, a source of strength that sustained her, that gave her the courage to resist. She felt Alara's wisdom, guiding her, protecting her, reminding her of her purpose. She felt the power of the Vale ancestors flowing through her, empowering her, emboldening her. She remembered her choice, her commitment, her love for Reese, her dedication to protecting the land, to preserving the balance.
She would not yield.
She would not be broken. She would not be controlled. She focused on her connection to Reese, on their bond, on the love that had been tested by fire, purified by sacrifice, strengthened by choice. It was a love that transcended the physical realm, a love that defied the darkness, a love that was worth fighting for. She drew upon that love, upon that connection, upon that power. She resisted the temptations of the old ones, their promises of power, their threats of destruction. She rejected their control, their manipulation, their darkness. She spoke, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness of their realm, a voice that was both her own and not her own, a voice that resonated with the power of the Vale, with the love she shared with Reese, with the determination to protect the world she knew. "I am Amara Vale," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am a guardian of this land. I am bound to Reese, by choice, by love, by a bond that you cannot break. I will not yield. I will not be controlled. I will fight." As she spoke the words, a surge of energy emanated from her, a wave of pure, white light that pushed back the darkness, that challenged the old ones, that declared her defiance. The old ones recoiled, their forms flickering, their voices turning to screams of rage and frustration. They had underestimated her, underestimated the power of love, of choice, of sacrifice. They launched a counterattack, their power overwhelming, their darkness suffocating. Amara felt herself weakening, her strength fading, her consciousness slipping away. But then, she felt a presence beside her, a familiar warmth, a powerful energy. It was Reese, his spirit form, his silver eyes blazing with love and determination. He had followed her, somehow, into the realm of the old ones, to stand by her side, to fight alongside her. He reached out, his spirit hand clasping hers, their bond rekindled, their love a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Together, they channeled the power of the Vale, the energy of the forest, the love they shared, into a unified force, a weapon against the old ones. They fought, side by side, their spirits intertwined, their love a shield against the darkness. They fought with a courage born of desperation, a strength born of love, a determination born of choice. The battle raged, a clash of ancient powers, of light and shadow, of love and hate. It was a battle that transcended the physical realm, a battle for the very soul of the world. And in the end, it was love that prevailed. Love, freely given, freely received, strengthened by sacrifice, purified by choice. Love, the most powerful force in the universe, the ultimate weapon against the darkness. The old ones, weakened, defeated, retreated back into the abyss, their power diminished, their threat averted. Amara and Reese, their spirits exhausted but triumphant, were pulled back, out of the realm of the old ones, back to the physical world, back to the circle of stones, back to Alara, back to the forest. They had returned, but the realm had changed them, and they knew, with a sinking feeling in their hearts, that they had only delayed the darkness, not ended it. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. Amara and Rhys returned to the physical world, collapsing onto the ground within the circle of stones, their bodies exhausted, their spirits drained, but their hearts filled with a fragile sense of triumph. They had faced the Old Ones, defied their power, and survived. But they knew it was only a temporary reprieve, a momentary victory in a war that was far from over. Alara rushed to their side, her face etched with worry, her hands hovering over them, checking for injuries, assessing their condition. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Amara nodded weakly, her body aching, her mind still reeling from the experience in the realm of the Old Ones. We stopped them," she said, her voice hoarse. "But it's not over." Rhys, struggling to sit up, his silver eyes clouded with exhaustion, but still holding a spark of determination, echoed her words. "They'll be back," he said. "Stronger. More determined." Alara sighed, her shoulders slumping with a weariness that belied her years. "The Old Ones are not easily defeated," she said. "They have waited centuries for this opportunity. They will not give up so easily." They knew they had to prepare, to strengthen their defenses, to find a way to permanently defeat the Old Ones, to protect the world from their darkness. But they were exhausted, depleted, their resources stretched thin. They returned to Alara's hidden chamber, seeking refuge, seeking guidance, seeking a way forward. The spirits of the Vale ancestors were waiting for them, their shimmering forms filling the chamber with a gentle light, their voices offering comfort and wisdom. "You have done well," they whispered. "You have shown courage, strength, love. But the final battle is yet to come. How do we defeat them?" Amara asked, her voice filled with desperation. "How do we end this, once and for all?" The spirits were silent for a moment, their forms flickering, their voices murmuring among themselves. Then, the spirit of Rhys's grandmother, her silver eyes filled with a knowing sadness, spoke. "The Old Ones draw their power from the darkness," she said. "From the fear, the hate, the despair that festers in the hearts of mortals. To defeat them, you must cut off their source of power. You must heal the land, cleanse the darkness, bring light back to the world." "We've been trying," Rhys said, his voice frustrated. "We've cleansed the places where the Blackwoods performed their rituals. We've healed the forest as much as we can. The darkness runs deeper," the spirit said. "It is not just in the land. It is in the hearts of the people. The Old Ones have been whispering their lies, sowing discord, fueling fear, turning people against each other." Amara's heart sank. She remembered the unsettling events in the town, the whispers of fear, the growing sense of unease. The Old Ones were not just attacking them directly, they were manipulating the people, turning them into unwitting instruments of their darkness. "What do we do?" Amara asked. "How do we fight an enemy that is everywhere?" "You must unite the people," the spirit said. "You must remind them of their shared humanity, of their capacity for love, for compassion, for hope. You must show them the light and help them choose it over the darkness." It was a daunting task, a seemingly impossible challenge. How could they unite a town that was being torn apart by fear and suspicion? How could they reach the hearts of people who were being manipulated by the Old Ones? They left the chamber, their minds filled with a heavy sense of responsibility, their hearts filled with a mixture of determination and trepidation. They knew they had to try, they had to fight, not just for themselves, but for the entire town, for the entire world. As they stepped outside, they saw a sight that made their blood run cold. The town was in chaos. Buildings were burning, people were screaming, fighting each other in the streets. The darkness of the Old Ones had taken hold, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. The whispers intensified, turning into roars. Chaos, fear, despair, the Old Ones, they feed. Amara and Rhys looked at each other, their eyes filled with a shared understanding, a shared determination. The final battle had begun. It was not a battle of magic, of power, but a battle for the hearts and minds of the people. A battle for the very soul of the world. The reckoning had arrived. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The scene that unfolded before them was a nightmare made real. The town, once a peaceful haven, was now a battleground, consumed by chaos, fear, and violence. The whispers of the old ones had taken root, twisting minds, poisoning hearts, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. Amara and Reese stood on the edge of the town, their hearts aching at the sight of the destruction, the suffering, the despair. They knew they had to act quickly, to intervene, to stop the madness before it consumed everything. "We need to reach them," Amara said, her voice filled with desperation. "We need to remind them of who they are, of their shared humanity." Reese nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "But how?" he asked. "They're blinded by fear, consumed by hate. They won't listen." They looked at each other, their eyes searching for answers, for a way forward. They knew they couldn't fight their way through the chaos, couldn't force people to listen, to understand. They had to reach their hearts, to touch their souls, to awaken the good that still resided within them. Amara remembered the words of the Vale ancestors, the wisdom of Alara, the power of their love. They had to show them the light, to help them choose it over the darkness. "We need to show them us," Amara said, her voice trembling but firm. "We need to show them our love, our bond, our connection to the forest. We need to remind them of the beauty, the peace, the hope that still exists." Reese nodded, understanding. It was a risky plan, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. They had to expose themselves, to make themselves vulnerable, to show the townspeople the truth, the power of love, the possibility of choosing light over darkness. They walked into the town, hand in hand, their hearts pounding in their chests, their bodies radiating the power of the Vale, the energy of their bond. They walked into the heart of the chaos, into the midst of the fighting, the screaming, the destruction. People stopped, stared, their eyes filled with confusion, with anger, with fear. They saw Amara, the Vale descendant, the woman they had whispered about, feared, suspected. They saw Reese, the werewolf, the creature of the shadows, the outsider. But they also saw something else. They saw their love, their connection, their unwavering bond. They saw the light that emanated from them, the warmth, the peace, the hope that defied the darkness. Amara raised her voice, her words amplified by the power of the Vale, reaching every corner of the town, piercing through the chaos, the fear, the hate. "People of Oakhaven," she cried. "Stop. Look at yourselves. Look at what you're doing. This is not who you are. This is the darkness talking, the fear, the hate. This is the influence of the old ones." Some people hesitated, their movements slowing, their eyes flickering with doubt. Others continued to fight, to scream, to rage, their minds consumed by the darkness. Reese stepped forward, his voice resonating with power, with authority, with love. "We are not your enemies," he said. "We are your neighbors, your friends, your protectors. We are here to help you, to save you from the darkness, to remind you of who you are." He transformed into his wolf form, his magnificent body radiating strength, but also gentleness, also love. He stood beside Amara, a symbol of their bond, of their connection to the forest, of the power that resided within them. Amara reached out, her hand gently touching Reese's fur, their bond shimmering between them, a visible manifestation of their love, their trust, their unity. "We are all connected," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Connected to each other, connected to the land, connected to the forest. We are all part of the same community, the same family. We must choose love over hate, peace over violence, hope over despair." Slowly, gradually, the fighting began to subside. People lowered their weapons, their eyes widening in realization, in shame, in remorse. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a glimmer of hope, a flicker of understanding. But then, A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness, radiating a chilling presence that made Amara's blood run cold. It was the servant of the Old Ones, her face still hidden by her hood, her eyes gleaming with a cold, cruel light. "You cannot stop us," she hissed, her voice echoing through the town. "The darkness is too strong. The Old Ones will prevail." She raised her hand, and the chaos began to reignite, the fear, the hate, the violence threatening to consume the town once more. Amara and Reese knew this was their final confrontation, their ultimate test. They had to defeat the servant of the Old Ones, to break her hold on the town, to sever the connection to the darkness. They stood together, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts united, their love a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. They drew upon the power of the veil, the energy of the forest, the strength of their bond, and they faced the servant of the Old Ones, ready to fight, ready to sacrifice, ready to defend the town, the world they loved. Amara, channeling the voices of the ancestors, the power of the veil, and the love that burned bright between her and Reese, spoke. Her voice was clear, strong, and filled with the undeniable truth. "You have no power here. This is a place of love, of community, of hope. The darkness cannot touch us, because we choose the light." The light emanating from their bond intensified, a blinding wave that washed over the town, over the servant of the Old Ones, consuming the darkness, dissolving the hate, healing the wounds. The servant of the Old Ones screamed, her form flickering, her power waning. She was being unmade, her connection to the Old Ones severed, her darkness extinguished. With a final, desperate cry, she vanished, disappearing into nothingness, leaving behind only a lingering scent of fear and a profound silence. The town was still, quiet, the chaos gone, the fear dissipated, the hate replaced by a fragile sense of peace, of hope, of unity. People looked at each other, their eyes filled with tears, with shame, with remorse, but also with a newfound understanding, a renewed connection. Amara and Reese stood together, their hands still clasped, their bodies exhausted, but their hearts filled with a profound sense of triumph. They had done it. They had defeated the Old Ones, saved the town, protected the world. The final confrontation had not been a battle of magic, of power, but a battle of hearts. And love had won. Epilogue. The sun rose over Oakhaven, casting a warm, golden light over the town, over the forest, over the land that had been ravaged by darkness, but was now slowly, surely, healing. The scars remained, visible reminders of the battle that had been fought, of the sacrifices that had been made, but they were also symbols of resilience, of courage, of the enduring power of love. Amara and Reese stood on the hill overlooking the town, hand in hand, their bond stronger than ever, a testament to their journey, to their commitment, to their choice. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged victorious, not unscathed, but transformed, strengthened, united. The town was slowly rebuilding, both physically and emotionally. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by a renewed sense of community, of connection, of hope. People were working together, supporting each other, rebuilding their lives, their homes, their relationships. Alara remained a guiding presence, a source of wisdom and strength, helping the town, helping Amara and Reese navigate the challenges that still lay ahead. The Old Ones were gone, their threat extinguished, but the world was still a complex, unpredictable place, and there would always be new challenges to face, new battles to fight. But Amara and Reese were ready. They had learned much, grown much, loved much. They had discovered the true meaning of their bond, the true power of their love, the true strength of their connection to the forest, to the Vale ancestors, to each other. They continued to live in Reese's cabin, deep in the heart of the forest, their lives intertwined with the land, with the spirits, with the whispers of the trees. Amara continued to work at the library, her sanctuary, her haven, now also a symbol of resilience, of the enduring power of knowledge, of stories, of connection. They often visited the Circle of Stones, the place where their journey had begun, where they had faced their greatest fears, where they had made their ultimate sacrifices, where they had found their true strength. It was a place of remembrance, of gratitude, of hope. Years passed, seasons changed, life unfolded. Amara and Reese grew older, their bodies bearing the marks of time, but their love remained as strong, as vibrant, as unwavering as ever. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale ending, but in a real, messy, complex, beautiful life, filled with challenges, with joys, with sorrows, with love. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire in their cabin, Amara looked at Reese, his silver eyes reflecting the warm glow of the flames, his face etched with the lines of time, but still radiating the same love, the same strength, the same unwavering commitment that had captured her heart so many years ago. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "We broke the curse. We saved the town. We found our way to each other." Reese smiled, a gentle, loving smile that reached his eyes and transformed his features. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his touch still sending a jolt of warmth through her, even after all these years. "We did," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Together." He leaned in and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that spoke of a love that had endured, a love that had triumphed, a love that would last forever. The forest whispered around them, a gentle lullaby, a song of peace, of hope, of enduring love. The veil line was free, and their love story, a testament to the power of choice, of sacrifice, of connection, would continue to be whispered among the trees for generations to come. The trees could finally sing. The end.